Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to Alluxio Product School. I'm thrilled to see all of you here today, and my name is Jing Wen. I'm a product manager at Alluxio. Some of you might not be familiar with Alluxio, especially the features of the Enterprise Edition. That's why we created the Alluxio Product School series to provide more information, as well as showcase our wonderful partners, such as NetApp. At the end of the presentation, we'll have time for live Q&As. Please submit your questions during the talk on our Slack channel, general channel, and I'll help to direct the question to the speakers. You can join our Slack via alluxio.io/Slack, which is at the bottom of the screen. So if, however, you have any trouble joining Slack, you could also submit any question about this webinar platform, Q&A. Cool. So today we're excited to have our speakers, Joseph and Michael, to join us. Joseph is solution architect at NetApp, and Michael is our global head of solution engineer at Alluxio. Without further ado, let's hear from Joseph and Mike on geo-distributed analytics with NetApp StorageGRID and Alluxio. Joseph and Mike, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Jingwing. As we all know how important data is to many of the organizations out there today. They are gathering business insights and making important business decisions using this data. And to keep up with this trend, companies are looking to modernize their data architecture by optimizing resources and reducing cost. Today, data is being collected from various different sources and is being analyzed by various different users and applications within and sometimes outside the organization. As a result of which, data movement is becoming a challenge, and customers are looking for ways to minimize data movement and the ability to analyze their data wherever it seems fit. And it could be in the public cloud, or it could be on premises. When it comes to keeping your data reliable, customers want a platform that's resilient to failures, where there are no downtime to their application, and this happens with ease of management. And of course, with optimized cost. And I talked about data growing exponentially, which basically translates to scaling your infrastructure at the same rate. And the ability to scale in a non-disruptive fashion is really key here. Another trend that we see, or a lot of customers asking us, is that the ability to decouple or disaggregate their compute and storage and be able to grow compute and storage separately on demand. This basically helps them be ahead of the industry trends and be able to adapt to new changes when it comes to workloads in the big data and analytical space. So today, NetApp and Alluxio are coming together to help our customers through this journey of modernizing their data center with minimal impact to their ongoing workload. Hello, everyone. My name is Joseph Kandatilparambil. I'm a solutions architect for the StorageGRID group, and I lead the big data analytical vertical for StorageGRID. I've been with the company for about 2 years now, and I've been in the storage industry for about 9 years. Today, I have with me Michael from Alluxio.
Hi, everyone. Mike Waldrop here. I'm at Alluxio, and I work with our global solutions engineering team. So I work with enterprises every day to help solve these big data problems that Joseph is describing. And today we're going to just kind of share with you some of what we find from working with these enterprises. There's a couple of big trends that are happening. I think we're all very aware that data is growing and booming, and we're all struggling and managing large amounts of data that can provide a huge amount of value to the enterprise. This is pushing the technology to be able to handle this data better. And certainly in the case of object storage, while it's been around for a while, it's typically been used in a number of different use cases. And really, the trend is to leverage this object technology to handle more and more data in all of these use cases. So it's not about just using object store for particular use cases, but across a much broader variety and at much larger scale as data grows. So this explosion of data and the explosion of value realized from the data is driving the need to modernize the way we store and manage the data. Of course, the other trend not new to anyone here, is leveraging additional ways to scale out and scale up these architectures, not only using object storage to get more efficient storage and more performant storage, but leveraging things like cloud, hybrid cloud in particular, to be able to grab the capabilities of the public cloud vendors and use that to drive our data platforms and data technologies to solve new and interesting problems. So I think everyone is somewhere on a cloud journey, and depending on where different enterprises are, they're taking different approaches, but we're starting to see hybrid being a very common approach to solving some of these problems, whether that's just your early stages in your cloud journey or your actual final destination, to leverage hybrid cloud so I can have some data on premises if I need to, or some compute on premises if I need to. So a typical type of journey that I've seen with a lot of enterprises that I talk to is they're looking to kind of modernize their data platform architecture. This might be a sequence that I see frequently. Not everybody takes the same steps in the same order, but just as an example journey. One of the first challenges that people want to solve is the idea of multiple big data repositories. And I want to simplify the way I connect my compute frameworks and applications to all of this data across the enterprise. So this idea of a unified namespace can provide a single access point to access multiple object repositories, and in fact, multiple types of object repositories, including things like HDFS repositories and S3 repositories, and make them all appear logically and easily to the analytics user, for example, who's trying to connect their applications to it. Then we're seeing a lot of folks trying to take some of those legacy repositories and move them into this new object store capability, or this newly improved object store capability. And we're going to talk more and more about that today as well. But how do I get the most value? How do I reduce the complexity and cost of what I'm doing to store this data by taking advantage of what object stores have to offer? And we mentioned hybrid cloud. A lot of times the next step might be bursting either compute to the cloud or even bursting storage to the cloud. We see some use cases where people want to have compute on premises in their existing data center architectures that they have, but use the cloud as a secure way to store data. And then ultimately, what often happens is a hybrid multi-cloud approach. This has a lot of advantages that Joseph will talk about in just a moment, but where I may have multiple public cloud providers that have services that I want to leverage, or I may have multiple applications across multiple cloud vendors, and I want one way to deal with data without having to shuffle it around as I spin up new use cases. So again, the order doesn't always happen exactly like this, but these are some of the typical steps we sort of see on this user journey. Now, at Alluxio, we talk about data orchestration, and it's this entire concept of a flexible layer that allows you to efficiently connect different types of data repositories to the most common kind of compute frameworks and applications that drive big data analytics often, or other data-intensive applications. So data orchestration with Alluxio provides you this abstraction between the compute and storage such that you can use a variety or a combination of all of these items between the lower level storage options and the top level of this picture, the compute frameworks. And certainly by leveraging StorageGRID to get the best object storage experience and plugging that in, what this orchestration layer or Alluxio layer provides is the flexibility across both on-prem and cloud to connect to those compute frameworks. So if we kind of take a picture of what this looks like, and in particular, how NetApp and StorageGRID and Alluxio partner together to solve these problems, this is kind of a picture of what I was describing, where maybe I have some on-prem components and resources still. I'm trying to leverage some cloud services, and I want a common place to store all of the data in StorageGRID. And Joseph's going to walk us through a little bit of this and some of the use cases of how enterprises are using this to solve real problems today. Joseph?
Thanks, Mike. Yes, so like Mike mentioned, object storage is gaining popularity in this space, especially in the big data analytics and AI ML space, for its ability to be able to easily manage and also scale pretty quickly. StorageGRID has been in this forefront of this trend, and we've been optimizing StorageGRID for workloads in this space. Now, modernizing your data center or your workloads does not mean migrating all your data to a new platform. So I'll walk you through each of these use cases and go through the diagram that's being described right now. But before I do that, I would like to spend some time talking about what StorageGRID is and what are some of the value propositions of StorageGRID when it comes to this particular vertical, that is big data and AI ML. So NetApp StorageGRID is an enterprise-grade object storage solution which talks native Amazon S3. It's a software-defined solution, and by that I mean you can run run StorageGRID software on a bare metal platform, a VMware-based platform, or even use our purpose-built appliances. Now, the cool thing about the software-defined solution is that within a single grid, you can actually have a variation of these 3 different platforms. And this enables you to actually create different tiers within your StorageGRID, where you can have high performance tier and also tiers that are just for archivals. And the way you would enable that is we have something called information lifecycle management built into StorageGRID. This is something that's very unique to StorageGRID, where you can create data management policy rules and decide how and where your data resides within StorageGRID. And as your requirement changes, as the data ages, you can change these policies to adapt to your new requirements. StorageGRID has a global namespace where you can basically talk to the single endpoint that StorageGRID has, and all these applications that are talking to it are actually segregated or separated at the tenant level. So it has true multi-tenancy capability. Now, let's say we have applications that are running running on StorageGRID, and all the data that the application is generating is actually being pushed into the New York location of your grid. And let's say all your data scientists actually sit in Seattle. What you can do is you can leverage the ILM policy engine that's built into StorageGRID and create a rule to duplicate that data or have multiple copies of that data. So let's say the data is being ingested into New York, you can create a copy of that data in Seattle and make that data set available for your data scientists to run through these run through these analysis. And as your data ages, you can actually retire that data by either erasure coding that across multiple sites, or even within a single site, or even archive it to the cloud. StorageGRID is a durable, highly available and a scale-out platform. And what I mean by that is when it comes to durability, StorageGRID has dual layered protection. So it has protection at the hardware level where we use something called DDP, which is very similar to RAID 5. And then at the software level, you can again leverage the policy engine that we have to create additional data protection rules. And that can be storing multiple copies of your data or erasure coding that data. When it comes to availability, StorageGRID is you can keep StorageGRID active. That means if you have 3 sites here, you can keep all the sites active and serve data to your application and even ingest it. This gives you the biggest bang for your buck because all your resources are being utilized at all times, and which is very different from the traditional approach where you have a primary site and a secondary site where most of the work is being done by the primary site and secondary site only comes into picture when there's a failure. Lastly, it is very important for an object storage platform to scale out very quickly, especially when it comes to workloads like big data and AI ML. And within StorageGRID, you can scale in a matter of hours, and you can add capacity or even performance, and claim that additional capacity into your S3 bucket. Lastly, we also have cloud integrations with Amazon, where you can actually leverage or you can expose your S3 bucket that's on StorageGRID to Amazon services via SNS notification. We also have capabilities where you can replicate data into an external source by using mirroring. And in addition to that, we also have something called metadata search, where you can actually just crunch through the data that resides on StorageGRID and figure out what gather insights into your data that resides on storage. So let's move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so now I would like to dive into each of the use cases that we have with Alluxio and how we can help you modernize your data center or modernize your data architecture when it comes to workloads in the big data and AI ML space. One of the popular use cases that we see among our customers is migrating data from HDFS to object storage. And they want to move away from HDFS for the reasons of, they want to reduce capacity or storage overhead costs that is in HDFS. And as the HDFS cluster grows, it becomes really tedious to manage it. And when it comes to object storage, so object storage is very easy to manage and is able to scale infinitely, especially for workloads like Spark and Presto. This is really important. And the way this works, or the way we've enabled this with Alluxio, is you can actually expose the HDFS endpoint to Alluxio. And when applications like Spark and Presto are reading that data, it actually caches that data set at Alluxio's layer. And when it's writing that data set back, it's actually writing it back to your S3 data lake. So you can slowly migrate your data off of HDFS. Or if you want to go the cap and grow route, where you can actually just cap your HDFS data and make the data available to applications like Spark or Presto, but all your newly ingested data comes into the S3 data lake. So depending on how your requirements, what your requirements are, you can basically set this up to actually slowly migrate off of HDFS. This truly enables you to actually decouple compute and storage, where you can actually now scale your compute and storage independently. And once your data is within StorageGRID, using the policy engine that I was talking about, you can create different tiers within StorageGRID. And for your active data that is being looked at, can be stored in the hot tier or a performant tier. And you can slowly retire that data to a cheaper, cheap and deep archival tier. And you can also leverage public cloud for that. Now let's take a look at the next use case. The next use case here basically depicts how you can expose your on-prem data onto cloud, where you can do this at a fraction of the cost that it will take to do this in the public cloud. In addition to that, you are basically lowering your egress charge by pulling the data once, and once the data is in Alluxio, you're not getting charged for pulling more data from outside your public cloud. This also gives you the flexibility of decoupling or separating your compute and storage. And this also helps you basically scale up your compute on demand as your requirements grow. And on the storage front, on your on-premises, you can grow StorageGRID as you need more capacity to save all your data. This way, you are able to store the right grades of data at the right tier. And what I mean by that is, at the storage layer, you are leveraging this ILM policy to actually assign the right tier of data, or right grade of data, the right tier. And at the Alluxio's layer, you also have the same flexibility, where it's caching the actively looked at data at the Alluxio's layer. So you have full control over where your data resides. And with a platform like StorageGRID, you're keeping your data very reliable and highly available. And this is the animation that I was talking about, where you have different grades of data at the right tier. Now, this third use case is sort of an extension of what I was talking about at use case 2, where this truly gives you the flexibility of running compute anywhere. So this basically helps you minimize data movement, where all your data basically, or the bigger data set resides on your S3 data lake, and the data that is being actively looked at is actually cached at Alluxio. This allows, this allows you to flexibly use services out in the public cloud. Now, let's say you are your company mainly uses AWS for most of these workloads, but you like a particular service in Azure, for example. you can basically just leverage Alluxio to duplicate data in Azure and run analytics using the service that you would like to do. And this basically, shows you how you're minimizing data movement. In addition to that, trying different services, you can actually, let's say there is a change in corporate strategy where they are moving away from AWS to, let's say, GCP. When this change happens, you are able to minimize data movement and just adapt to your new requirements. So this truly, our partnership basically gives you the ability to leverage all the services that's available out there. And as your requirement changes, you can just keep adapting to those new requirements. So lastly, I would like to conclude by saying StorageGRID has been optimized for high performance and scale, which makes it very suitable for workloads like analytics and AI/ML. And our partnership with Alluxio is able to provide customers with this flexibility to build hybrid cloud environments anywhere. I hope you all enjoyed this session and found it useful. Now I'll hand it back to Jingwing for questions.
Cool, thank you, Joseph and Michael. Great presentation and wonderful to hear about all the benefit brought by the integration of NetApp StorageGRID and Alluxio. So everyone, please put in the questions in the Slack channel, and maybe we can go back to the slide that we have so people can see the channel. So before the questions coming in, I have one question. So assuming I'm someone new to the distributed computing, would you please summarize why the separation of compute and storage is so important?
Sure. I'll start. Joseph, you can add in. I think it's really, there's a couple of advantages. One, certainly optimization of resources. So by separating these tiers, we can scale them independently. And I think what was really interesting in what Joseph just presented in a multi-cloud idea, when I separate the compute and store, what I can do is leverage even compute frameworks for multiple cloud vendors without having to move data around. So using data orchestration in Alluxio, I can just plug in Alluxio and it can go fetch the data from wherever it is and make it available to that service wherever it lives. So now instead of having to spin up a whole entire infrastructure that includes both storage and compute, I can easily grab compute resources from cloud or other on-prem centers and be able to point it at the data without having to do a massive data migration. And the data can move if it needs to as I use it. But really, that's what our enterprises are seeing today. And in a recent use case with a customer, they're saying, I have more data analysts that want to get to this data, but they don't have the storage resources and the entire compute resources to run their own use cases independent from my primary use cases and clusters. So we give them some compute nodes. We use Alluxio to get the data that those compute nodes need from the existing cluster, and they're able to spin up new data analysts very quickly who can get to the data without having to move the data, and all they need is enough compute to run their analytics jobs.
Yeah, and I'll add my answer from a storage perspective. So when you're dealing with large sets of data, it's actually different grades of data that sits there. It's a particular set of data that is being actively looked at, but the rest of the data does not need the same level of performance. So when you actually decouple it, you're actually assigning the right amount of resources for running these sort of workloads. And this way you're optimizing cost where data that is not being looked at or that is aged is actually sitting at a tier that's lower cost. So this way you're optimizing your resources overall.
Cool. Money saving is always great. Yeah. There's one more question. So can you elaborate more on why vendor lock-in could be a potential risk? And is there any vendor lock-in on Alluxio itself?
Sure, I'll start. I think in an ideal world, leveraging the services that, say for instance, a public cloud vendor provides, if you can leverage the services that you want without being trapped and having to stay there because it's too hard to move, it really just drives the agility, right? So vendor lock-in is a little bit about maintaining the agility. There's certainly some cost benefits because if I can, one of our large customers today has told us what they really want to be able to do is if I need to spin up an analytics job, I want to go find the least expensive compute resources across, say, for example, Amazon data centers, right? Instead of just always spinning it up in the data center where my data is, there may be another data center that's much, much cheaper. And if I'm just going to run a few jobs, it would be really convenient if I could just spin it up in one of the less expensive data centers of Amazon, have it use the data that it needs by fetching it from Alluxio, and then turn it off when I'm done. Right, so that agility and flexibility, I think, is what we're getting to, and by making everything through Alluxio and standards based, I don't have to worry about can I spin up in even another cloud provider if I want to, if it happens to be less expensive at the time. So there's definitely a cost thing and an agility piece that's there, and I think that's generally what we're seeing from this motivation to have the ability to handle multiple cloud vendors and not be locked into just one.
Cool. I think second part of my question was, how about the Alluxio itself? I heard sometimes like we store the data as a different form, and does Alluxio does that, or is that a transparent layer? Can you say something about that?
Sure. So with the data orchestration capabilities of Alluxio, your client applications, your Spark jobs, your Presto jobs, whatever it is, has no knowledge or concern about the storage format and how it's stored behind the scenes. So the fact that it's stored in StorageGRID and it's object storage may be completely transparent to the job that I'm running, who wants to just, it knows it wants to talk S3, but it doesn't care so much about where or when or how or what it is. So you can use whatever data formats the data needs to be in. You can store it in StorageGRID or other repositories without your client applications or frameworks having to be aware of any particular details of the storage infrastructure underneath it. Make
Cool.
sense?
Yep. Finding the cheapest storage for the right job. That sounds good. Anything Michael and Joseph want to add? I think the cloud is a bit shy today. So if there's no more questions, that will be for today. And I hope you all enjoyed the talk. So please join our Slack channel for more discussion if there's any after the talk. Cool.
Sounds good. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.